Okay, so let's unpack this. We're continuing our deep dive into um, the complexities of coexistence with foreign residents. We're moving beyond the general talk now, really getting into the specific kind of structural challenges Japan's facing right now.
Yeah, the material we went through, it gives a pretty clear-eyed look at four big areas, right? And they seem really interconnected. You've got this rapid real estate buying, the strain from tourism, the labor market future, especially for essential jobs like caregivers, and then these global policies on highly skilled workers.
That's right. And our goal today really is to give you the essential context. We're trying to compare what's happening in Japan, sort of looking at what other developed countries have already gone through. So you can see maybe where these trends are heading, especially if they're not, managed carefully. We're not just looking at what's happening, but critically why these specific points matter, for your community and the economy as a whole. Okay, let's start with that first one then, the global flow of capital into Japanese real estate. It's definitely a hot topic. The sources seem to identify two pretty distinct problems with foreigners buying property here. What's the split?
Yeah, the materials draw a really clear line. So problem one is, well, it's the classic urban housing inflation. You get this huge inflow of capital, it drives up property prices, drives up rent. And pretty soon, regular folks can't afford housing. We've seen it over and over, US, UK, Canada, Australia, rising housing costs. They lead directly to more homelessness. It's a known pattern.
Right. And you mentioned a second area, one that feels maybe more sensitive than just market economics. What's that second really critical area the sources flag about land buying?
This one touches on security and resources directly. It's about buying land that's linked to essential things like water sources, forests, and also national security, specifically land near self-defense force bases, often in more rural areas. And the thing driving this is, well, it's partly just powerful economics. The yen's weakness makes Japanese assets look, frankly, incredibly cheap internationally. It's like putting stability itself on sale. Plus, you have specific situations in other countries. Like, land isn't privately owned in China, right? So wealthy individuals there look for stable places like Japan to park their assets securely. And you see similar moves from places with political or currency instability, like Russia, for example.
And this isn't just theoretical, right? There are actual security implications already showing up.
Oh, absolutely. The sources cite examples. Capital buying land near military bases, near crucial water sources. There's that long-running issue in Tsushima, with Korean capital buying land near strategic points. And even when it's purely commercial, things can go wrong. Like that unfinished Chinese hotel project in Niseko. It's just left there, damaging the local landscape and economy.
And a big part of why this is happening structurally goes back decades to a specific policy decision, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. Japan's regulations here are, well, surprisingly weak. Because back in 1994, when Japan joined GATS, that's the WTO Services Agreement, they decided not to keep the right to restrict foreign land purchases. The hope was it would attract foreign investment. But the result is foreigners can buy strategic land, even without permanent residency.
Wow. So basically a legal loophole allowing potentially untracked foreign ownership of sensitive land. What's being done about that now without, breaking those international agreements?
Well, there's the land use restriction law now. It tries to limit how land near important facilities can be used. But the bigger picture, who owns what, remains largely untracked. People are talking about new laws, but the tricky part is respecting those GATS obligations while still protecting national security. It's threading a very fine needle.
Okay, so capital flow changes who owns a place, but there's another massive flow changing the experience of living in communities. Tourism, sure, it brings money in, but what about these negative externalities the sources talk about? How are they really hitting local residents?
Yeah, the main problem is the sheer strain on infrastructure that was built for the local population, not these huge surges. The biggest pain point mentioned is just chronic traffic congestion. And it's not just annoying, like making shopping or getting to the hospital harder. Critically, it actually slows down emergency vehicles. That puts people genuinely at risk.
That impact on just daily life really jumps out from the material. The example of Kyoto, it paints a really vivid picture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine being a local there in peak season. You can hardly find a taxi. The buses are constantly jammed full. And then there's the litter trash piling up on streets, even in private gardens, because there just aren't enough public bins to handle that temporary population explosion. It's just, it feels unsustainable for the people living there year-round.
So if the government wants the economic boost from tourism, it seems like they have to deal with the downside for their own citizens. How are local governments trying to tackle this? What are the solutions being discussed?
It really comes down to local action. There's a growing realization they need better systems to manage how tourists behave and ease the burden on residents. The main tool seems to be introducing lodging taxes or broader tourism taxes. But, and this is crucial in the sources, that money has to go directly back into fixing the problems. Things like more cleaning crews, upgrading infrastructure, boosting public transport capacity. That way, the residents who are putting up with the crowds actually see some direct benefit.
Right, makes sense. Let's shift gears now to the labor market. This is where things get, well, structurally really interesting, I think. There's this tension, isn't there? Japan desperately needs workers in essential jobs like caregiving, construction, but there's also this public anxiety about foreign workers taking jobs. Let's focus on caregiving first.
Yes, and it's important we're specific here. We're talking about caregiving work, the day-to-day assistance, not necessarily nursing qualifications. And the harsh reality laid bare in the materials is that the pay just doesn't match the work involved. It's physically and emotionally demanding stuff. Look at the numbers highlighted. The average annual income for a caregiver, around 3.8 million yen. That's almost a full million yen less than the average Japanese annual income across all sectors.
Wow, nearly a million yen gap. That's huge for a job that's so essential, especially with Japan's aging population. How does the system even keep going with that kind of pay gap?
Well, it relies on basically structural issues. Caregiving, like childcare, has historically been low-wage work, often done by women. So the workforce tends to be dominated by non-regular female employees, many in their 50s and 60s, who maybe don't have the bargaining power for higher wages. The system kind of depends on this existing pool.
Okay, and this leads right into what the material calls the narcotic analogy. Can you break that down? What's that trap?
Sure. The idea is that the ready availability of trainees, often coming through visa programs who are willing to accept these low wages, it acts like a drug for the industry. It eases the immediate pain of labor shortages without forcing the industry to make fundamental changes, like raising wages significantly. But the side effect is dangerous. This constant supply of low-wage labor discourages younger Japanese people from even considering caregiving. They look at the pay and the work and think, no thanks, and aim for office jobs instead.
That sounds like setting up for a long-term economic problem.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because many of those easier office jobs, they're the ones most vulnerable to AI and automation down the line. So if you structurally push Japanese workers away from essential hands-on jobs today, they could face unemployment tomorrow. And that could lead to more people needing social welfare, which is a trend we're already seeing bits of in Europe. And there's another catch with relying on trainees. What happens when these foreign workers gain skills, maybe get permanent residency? Well, they're likely to leave caregiving for better-paying jobs, either elsewhere in Japan or even another country. This is already happening in Europe. You invest in training someone, and then they leave because the core job just doesn't pay enough to keep them. It's a brain drain or maybe a skills drain.
Yeah, I see. And the sources suggest similar risks exist in construction, too. Like bringing in lots of foreign workers without raising overall wages could drag down pay for everyone and maybe even impact quality if skills aren't passed on properly.
Exactly. The potential is there for lowering wage standards across the board. And critically, yes, the loss of that careful know-how from experienced Japanese construction workers, if it's not deliberately transferred, that could affect infrastructure quality long-term. So the key takeaway from the analysis isn't really about restricting foreign workers. It's about making these essential jobs attractive to Japanese workers in the first place. And the main way to do that, significantly raise the pay for roles like caregivers, break that dependency on the low-wage narcotic.
Okay, so that's the challenge at one end of the labor market. Let's flip to the other end in our final segment. Highly skilled workers and these evolving residency policies.
Right. And here we really need to look internationally for context. The U.S. experience with IT workers is pretty telling. They had wide acceptance of high-skilled workers, particularly through the H-1B visa program. But it led to situations where large numbers of American IT workers were laid off, arguably because they couldn't compete on salary scale. And now, well, the U.S. has recently brought in huge fee increases and effectively tighter limits on H-1B visas.
Which mainly impacts tech workers from places like India and China, who are often very mobile, right?
Precisely. Now, connect that to another piece of information. Japan recently stated a commitment, reportedly, to accept potentially 500,000 Indian technicians over the next 5 years. Given the U.S. tightening up, you have to wonder, is Japan positioning itself to become the new big destination for those skilled workers who can no longer easily get into the U.S.? If so, that needs careful planning.
Interesting. Meanwhile, other countries are thinking about who gets to stay long term. The material mentions the UK looking at wealth based residency, tying long term stays or permanent residency extensions to how much money someone has. What's the logic there?
The thinking seems pretty straightforward. They want to encourage foreigners who might eventually rely on Social Security or state pensions, basically, non-wealthy retirees, to leave after their working lives are over.
Hmm.
It's presented as a way to protect the public welfare system from future costs.
But if the goal is a dynamic economy, does focusing only on attracting and keeping the wealthy actually work? The source material seems quite critical of this idea.
It is critical, yes. It raises a fundamental question. Does a society composed mainly of the wealthy really stimulate a broad-based economy? The critique warns that this kind of policy just fuels urban housing inflation even more. It makes the cost of living shoot up for everyone else. And ultimately, it could push out average citizens, the very people who form the backbone of the workforce and community.
And to make that point about the risk of relying on just one group, the sources bring up the Yubari analogy. Can you explain that?
Sure, Yubari City, the former coal mining town in Hokkaido, it became completely dependent on that single industry, that single type of worker. When the coal industry collapsed, the town just couldn't recover. It faced this unstoppable depopulation. The lesson, according to the analysis, is that a mixed society, one with diverse people, diverse industries, what the source calls the Tana society, is actually much more resilient. A society composed only of the wealthy, counterintuitively, might be quite fragile if that wealth source falters.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together from land rules to tourism impacts, caregiver wages, skilled worker policies, what's the big picture? What's the underlying philosophy of coexistence being suggested?
Well, the argument coming through the source material is pretty clear. A society with a genuine mix of people, this Zatana or diverse society, is ultimately the strongest and most adaptable. We have to understand why people are coming here.
Yeah, some foreigners come just for the money, right? Or to buy property as an investment. But the sources suggest those people, the sort of transactional residents, they'll likely leave if the economic advantage disappears, like if the yen bounces back.
Exactly. So the core principle for building real coexistence, the argument goes, should be about welcoming people who genuinely want to live here because they like Japan. People who respect the culture, the customs, regardless of how much money they have right now. These are the individuals, the sources suggest, who will form the stable core of a lasting integrated society.
And this focus on attitude and values helps distinguish different kinds of issues, doesn't it? The materials seem to suggest that minor problems, like littering or maybe petty theft, are less likely among people who see Japan as their long-term home and want to integrate. So the crucial question isn't just about income or skills, but more like, what commitment, what values do they bring to being part of Japanese society? Right. So let's try to summarize then. We've covered quite a bit: land security concerns, the pressure points of tourism, that really critical crisis in caregiver pay, and these big global shifts in how countries handle high skilled labor. And the common thread seems to be less about the sheer number of foreigners and more about the quality of their connection and commitment to the community they're joining.
I think that's a fair summary. And maybe that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If raising pay for caregivers is key to making those jobs viable for Japanese workers, key to avoiding more pressure on social welfare later, then we have to ask something deeper. Beyond just more money, what else could make those essential caregiving roles not just financially viable, but truly attractive and respected in Japanese culture? How do we break that narcotic cycle of low wages for good? That feels like a huge national structural challenge. And maybe it starts simply by recognizing the profound value of that work itself.